Good morning, my name is Lizzy Wolfe, and today, as we look at Jesus calming the storm, I want to talk about two things: change and how to be a storm sleeper. Let's start with change. In our Bible passage, Jesus and his disciples are in a boat on the Sea of Galilee. It's not a big lake, but it's known for sudden storms which come sweeping down from the hills. That's what happens here. The disciples are in the boat. Maybe they're chatting about some of the things they've just seen. Jesus has been healing people, including Peter's own mother-in-law. Maybe they're wondering what's next when they reach their destination. Maybe they're tired, like Jesus. But then, everything changes. We're told suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake. Waves swept over the boat. Whatever else they'd been doing or thinking about is abandoned. The storm dominates. It demands attention and action. There are some obvious parallels between the storm in our story and the coronavirus pandemic. Do you remember the start of 2020? We went places. We met people. We shook hands. Sometimes we even hugged. We had plans. Some of us had never even heard of Zoom. But then the pandemic arrived, and on the 23rd of March, lockdown started. Suddenly, everything changed, just like it did for the disciples when the storm came up. At St. George's, we've adapted as best we can, trying to respond with clean hands and pure hearts, moving online and learning an enormous amount along the way. We've been very aware that people have been impacted differently. Ethnic minorities, those in care homes, and people with underlying health conditions have been disproportionately affected by the disease. And lockdown was a very different experience depending on the quality of our accommodation and whether we had access to things like a garden or the internet. Church is people, community, family. And so we've been trying to care for each other in various ways, including telephone support, a financial hardship fund, lighthouse food parcels, Zoom small groups. Everything has changed. It all looks different. But at the same time, there's a sense in which nothing has changed, both for the disciples in our story and for us. What do I mean by that? Well, if you look at the big picture, the calming of the storm is just one episode of a whole series of extraordinary adventures with Jesus. The disciples spend an evening watching Jesus heal people. Then he calms the storm. Next, he restores two demon-possessed men, sending the demons into a herd of pigs. And it's not long before Jesus is raising a girl from the dead. There's never a dull moment with Jesus. And in this context, calming a storm is almost business as usual. Nothing has changed. And for us, if we look at the big picture, Jesus is Lord. He's still with us. We still live in a world that needs the hope and peace that is found in Jesus. Nothing has changed. As a church, our vision hasn't changed either. We're still called to preach Jesus, make disciples, serve the city, and send out leaders. At the start of 2020, on Vision Sunday, we highlighted three big areas where we felt God was calling us to reach out. We're still working on all of them. First, the marginalised. Lighthouse is our community for people who are battered and bruised by the storms of life. Things like addiction, mental health crisis, trauma, and homelessness. During the 3 months of lockdown, Lighthouse provided more than 5,000 pastoral phone calls 1,000 food parcels, 360 outdoor services of worship and pastoral support, usually on doorsteps, and 500 support hours for the most vulnerable who were unable to stay home alone. I want to pay tribute today to John Swales and the Lighthouse team for their faith, adaptability and courage. And I also want to thank all of you who have prayed and given financially to support this vital ministry. The second area is students. There are 70,000 students in Leeds. In the last academic year, only 400 went to a church of any denomination, including about 100 at St George's. We want every student in Leeds to have the opportunity to come to know Jesus. So we're partnering with St Augustine's Wrangthorne, which is located right in the heart of the student area, to plant a student church for unchurched students. It's called Church at Hyde Park Corner. Over the past few months, we've gathered a great team of interns and students. They're starting to connect with unchurched students using Instagram and other technology. And we hope that Church at Hyde Park Corner will launch in January 2021. The third area is city centre workers. Normally, more than 60,000 people work in Leeds city centre, and we expect that most of them will return in time. We want those city centre workers to hear about Jesus and the peace he brings. So we're working with Leeds Minster to launch a new weekday mission and ministry at Holy Trinity Boar Lane, the church by the Trinity Shopping Centre. This year there's been a lot of work going on behind the scenes, sorting out the diocesan structures, making the building fit for purpose and recruiting a team. We're about to launch a prayer community to pray specifically for this ministry, so do look out for details of that. As well as these three big areas, we're very close to being able to tell you where our next church plant will be, led by Julia, our planting curate. We're running Alpha online from the end of September, and we're working on some very special plans for Christmas. St George's has a big vision for Leeds, and there's a part for everyone to play. There are three main ways you can get involved: pray, serve and give. Nothing's changed there either. But I do want to say a huge thank you to everyone who contributes in whatever way. We can only do this if we're all in it together, and we're so grateful for your support in difficult times. So, we've been thinking about change. This year, with the storm of coronavirus, everything has changed and nothing has changed. As we continue to face this storm together as a church family, the next thing I want to look at is how to be a storm sleeper. Let me explain what I mean. In our passage, the disciples are afraid. That's not surprising, they're in a life-threatening situation. It's likely they all knew people who had drowned in similar storms. I think most of us have felt afraid or anxious at some point in the last few months. Maybe you feel afraid or anxious right now. Some people feel energised in high-stress emergency situations. But as this storm has gone on so long, exhaustion and frustration often kick in. It can be hard to concentrate or get motivated. These are all normal responses, though they can feel disorientating. Back in the storm on the Sea of Galilee, in contrast to the fearful disciples, Jesus is sleeping. Now, he's had a busy day, he's probably tired, but that's not the whole story. In Mark's version, the disciples wake him saying, "Teacher, Don't you care if we drown? But of course Jesus cares. Jesus cares for the disciples and for us more than we can imagine. He cares enough to die on the cross for us, to save us from the power of sin and death. So not caring isn't what this is about. Jesus, the storm sleeper, is showing us the peace that's possible when we trust God in the storms of our lives. In the Old Testament, there are several examples where sleep is evidence of trust in God's promises. The most well-known is probably Psalm 4, verse 8. In our house, we often pray this verse as we put the children to bed. In peace I will lie down and sleep. For you alone, Lord, make me dwell in safety. Jesus can sleep peacefully through the storm because he knows that whatever happens, he and his Father are in control. He wants us to know that peace too. Peace that passes understanding. The peace of a storm sleeper. So how can we learn to be storm sleepers? I've got 3 steps to share with you. Firstly, invite Jesus into your boat. If you were caught in a storm in the middle of a lake, who would you want in your boat? You might think the best person would be an Olympic sailor or perhaps a strong, experienced fisherman. But several of the disciples were fishermen, and this storm has defeated them. They think they're going to drown. Then Jesus gets up, rebukes the wind and waves, and it's completely calm. That's who I want in my boat. If we invite Jesus into the boat of our life, he doesn't promise us no more storms. In fact, if you look carefully at our passage, you see the disciples are in their storm because they followed Jesus. But he does promise he will never leave us. We will never face a storm alone. Have you invited Jesus into your life? All you need to do is pray a simple prayer. Sorry, thank you, please. Sorry for all the things I've done wrong in my life. Thank you for dying on the cross for me. Please come into my life. There'll be an opportunity to pray that prayer in a few minutes at the end of this talk. That's the first step to becoming a storm sleeper. Invite Jesus into your life. The second step is get to know Jesus. When Jesus rebukes the storm, the disciples are amazed and ask, "What kind of man is this? Even the wind and waves obey him." The disciples know the old stories, how God parted the Red Sea to let the Israelites pass through. The storm stories of Jonah and Noah, the creation story. Now they're beginning to see that Jesus is more than just a man. He exercises God's sovereign power over the elements, over the forces of chaos. Following this God-man is going to change everything. What could you do to get to know Jesus more? Many Christians read or listen to a few verses of the Bible every day. I would really encourage you to give that a try if you're not already. Others listen to worship music. Some people pray when they're outside doing something active. Being part of a small group is really helpful, especially when we can't meet physically on a Sunday. Others find that they get to know Jesus best when they're serving other people like Jesus did. Maybe you invited Jesus into your life today, or maybe it was decades ago. Either way, I want to encourage you to keep getting to know Jesus more. That's the second step to becoming a storm sleeper. The third step is to trust Jesus. We can't make ourselves trust Jesus just by trying really, really hard. It doesn't work like that. But if we invite him into our lives, if we get to know him well, trust grows. Because Jesus is trustworthy. He is for you. He loves you. He is completely committed to you. Jesus chose to die for you and for me to make a way for us to be with God. He is our rescuer, our Lord, and our friend. When we choose to trust Jesus, we find peace, even in the midst of storms. So that's the third step to becoming a storm sleeper. Trust Jesus. I can think of quite a few examples of storm sleepers at St George's, but I'm going to tell you about just one of them. Brian Duxbury, who used to be our buildings manager, he is a great example of a storm sleeper. Brian has lived with cancer for many years. It's not been easy. Sometimes he would come to work in quite a bit of physical pain. But his trust in Jesus has been a wonderful encouragement to many of us. He's always looking for ways to bless others. He radiates peace. Brian is a storm sleeper. What about you? How's your storm sleeping? We've looked at 3 steps. Firstly, invite Jesus in. Secondly, get to know Jesus. And thirdly, trust Jesus. Where are you on that journey? And is there something that you need God's help with today?